y'all, Dixie here. Today I'd like to talk about some of the more weird realizations that long distance backpackers often have about themselves once they've been on trail for a while. Some of y'all may have heard that if a domesticated pig that, say, lives on a farm ends up being turned loose into the wild, before long that pig will turn into a feral hog, grow darker hair, maybe tusks, and before long you won't be able to recognize that it was a once domesticated pig. Well, I feel like some of us humans who have spent an extended period of time on trail can probably relate to this in one way or another. I noticed for myself that there were some changes in me that I wasn't really expecting. I hadn't read anywhere in a book or anything like that. And I asked on my social media platforms if those of y'all who watch this channel also experience things like that. And so I've compiled a list today of things that folks tend to notice about themselves that you might not hear about otherwise. And I want to share that with you today, just in case you're thinking about getting out on a long distance hike. These are some of the things that you might expect to see in yourself. First, let's talk about some of the changes in the sense of smell. When I first started out, my body odor was kind of offensive to me. I mean, it wasn't great. I knew I stunk. But it seemed over time that I got more accustomed to it or familiar with it. And after a while, I started to smell like basil to myself. Not necessarily pleasant, but like it had a twinge of basil anyway. And when I mentioned that on social media, they said that they also related their BO to different familiar odors. One girl said every time she pops off a piece of aloe from her aloe plant, she smells what her BO smells like. And there were other familiar scents that people related their BO to, like crayons, onions, maple syrup, skunk, and weed, which I guess those two things are pretty similar these days. And because one's body odor becomes so familiar after several days without bathing, once you get into town, you might not realize how bad you actually smell to other people. And if you're sitting in a restaurant, you've not had a chance to take a shower yet, you might notice people looking at you strangely or like sniffing the air, wondering what smells so terrible. But I think the true test to really gauge how terrible you smell is once you get to town after not having a bath for several days, you take off your clothes, you take a shower, and then try to put the same clothes back on that you were just hiking in. And I guarantee you they're much more offensive than when you first peeled them off and you were still gross. And that's something else that somebody commented to me, is that they didn't realize truly how much grime and filth was associated with backpacking, because they say no pictures can do it justice, no videos. It's just something you don't truly realize until, especially once you shower and watch all of it go down the drain. Also, I think a lot of long distance backpackers notice that in normal everyday life, we're really desensitized as far as our sense of smell goes, because it doesn't take very long being on trail, and if you smell a day hiker pass you, they smell amazing. I mean, oftentimes you'll even smell them before you see them. Some people even say that after they've been on trail for a while, the scent of soap, shampoo, conditioner, body spray, deodorant, etc., fabric softener even, is just too much for them, and it's really off-putting and almost stinks after they've been on trail for a while. For me, as long as it's just one or two people, I'm fine on trail. But it seems when I first get back to town, it takes a while for me to get used to smelling all of those scents at one time. So I think you realize how much your nose just kind of turns off all of those scents. It's not that they're not as strong, it's just you get so used to smelling those things every day. And when you're out in nature and you've got fresh air and a break from all of that, then you do smell all that stuff at one time, and it's kind of like an overload. But I noticed that I could smell a campfire at what seemed to be a longer distance than before, because my nose was so used to not really smelling much or just my body odor. So it would kind of tune into those little things that maybe before it wouldn't have tuned into. Now let's talk about some changes that folks tend to notice about their sense of taste. First of all, long distance backpackers tend to have some pretty strange cravings, like pregnant lady cravings. And not just on trail where they're mixing a conglomeration of things together that maybe in normal life they would have never put together, like bacon bit peanut butter tortilla wraps or something like that, or peanut butter in their ramen noodles, etc. But it's not even just on trail. When you get back to town, especially on a thru hike, for myself on the AT, I was just all the time craving chocolate milk. As soon as I got to town, that's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to shower, I didn't want to bed, I didn't want to eat, I wanted some chocolate milk, and now. I know a lot of people told me that they don't typically drink Coca-Colas or any carbonated beverages, but when they thru hiked, they just really craved that stuff. And then some people even get almost like this obsession or addiction to certain snacks on trail. For myself, it was salt and vinegar chips on several of the trails. I've also had a thing for Snickers, but it's almost like you have to have this thing, and if you don't have it, then you're thinking about it every day while you're hiking. And I can't really explain it. I've never had a child, so I don't know about pregnancy cravings, but from what I've been told, it's pretty similar. Like, you're just thinking about this thing and you really want it. Also, many hikers have noted that their standards for food have gone completely down during long distance backpacking trips. And I've often wondered that for myself, because there are several restaurants along my thru hikes that I've wanted to go back to because they were so delicious while I was on trail, and I wonder if it's not because I was just that hungry and not actually because they were that good. I know one way I've kind of gauged this with myself is I love mountain house meals while I'm on trail, but if you try to eat one at the house, I mean, they're all right, they're not terrible, but it just does not taste the same, I'm convinced. Like, my taste buds change somehow from when I'm at home to when I'm on trail, because my standards significantly drop. And finally, another thing that was noted with sense of taste is once you're on trail and you're drinking out of fresh water sources a lot, especially if you're on a trail that does have good water sources, once you return back to town, city water just tastes disgusting. I mean, you can taste the chlorine in it. Sometimes it's almost like you're drinking pool water, especially if you've been backpacking somewhere like the Sierra Nevada, where the water sources are just almost pristine. And so you've got that good water that really has no flavor, and you go into a town somewhere and it's just, it's obvious that you're drinking faucet water. As far as hearing goes, some people say that they feel like their hearing is a bit more fine-tuned when they're on trail. For myself, I think that this is definitely true. If I hear something walking through the woods during the day, oftentimes before I even look up, I have a pretty good idea of what animal it is, you know, just from hearing alone. But I feel like this is pretty true of anybody who spends time in the woods, maybe not even an extended period of time, but day hiking, hunters, kayakers, etc. But it is funny how that can disappear at night when you're in your tent and you hear something outside of your tent, because I'm telling you, a caterpillar sounds like a grizzly when you're camping alone at night. But one of the things I think is a bit more unique to long distance hikers is that after spending so much time out on trail and not having so much stimulation and noise constantly, that going into town can be a bit overwhelming. I know for myself, I noticed this at grocery stores, just hearing people talking and the beep of things getting scanned and the machines at the self-checkout talking, and just all of that noise, as the Grinch would say. And if you don't believe me, then try the same experiment I tried when I was on the Appalachian Trail, and go from just the serenity of the trail and then throw yourself into Times Square in New York City, because that's something I went and did while I was on the AT. And I wonder now, since I've been back in civilization since my last thru hike, if going to Times Square would be quite as overwhelming. My guess is no. Now let's talk about sense of sight. I know I've talked about this in some of my videos before, but somebody else mentioned this when I asked about other people's experiences on trail. And she said that even though everybody who is on trail during a thru hike is just disgusting and dirty and grody, somehow you see beauty in them, and the men are handsome and the women are just really pretty with no makeup and just being very natural. And then you go back to normal life and you put on makeup and feel like a clown. And I remember seeing a lady at a zoo in New York where the AT passes through when I was on my thru hike, and she had on so much makeup, it reminded me of a character from the Hunger Games, from the Capitol, you know, how they really doll up and everything. And I mean, she was a very beautiful lady, but it just looked very strange to me because at that point I was so used to seeing women, including myself, not wearing makeup. So it's interesting how we almost come back to our caveman selves, and the more natural thing is beautiful, because before my thru hike of the AT, I mean, even to go to Walmart, I was putting on some kind of makeup because I felt naked without it. And now I don't worry about that as much. You know, if I didn't have a chance to put on makeup that day, I'm gonna have just as much fun as if I had on a whole bunch of makeup. So anyway, that certainly took some time to change in myself. I'd say, you know, 3 or so months on the AT of not being able to fix my hair, not being able to put on makeup, and still being in towns when I resupplied. Another thing that I noticed with my sense of sight is I seemed to get onto a schedule with the sun. So when the sun came up, I was waking up, even though I kind of drag getting out of camp, and then once the sun went down, I was ready to wind down for the evening, set up camp, and before long I was out. But once I went to town to take a 0 day, I would notice if I didn't cut off the lights, if I stayed in a private motel room or something like that, that I would stay up and I wouldn't even realize how late it was, because it was like my body was used to, well, if you see light, then you're awake. Now let's talk about some things that are a bit more physical, like going to the bathroom when you're out on a long distance hike. I got used to being able to go to the bathroom pretty much wherever and whenever I wanted to, with respect to the distances to trail and water and campsites, etc. But pretty much I could just wait until I had the strong urge to go and go on and go. But once you get back to normal life, it takes some time to transition back to the idea of I have to wait in line to go to the bathroom, or a bathroom might not be immediately available. So I had to remind myself when I got back to civilization that as soon as I noticed the urge to go to the restroom, I needed to start looking for one instead of waiting until I had to go immediately. Somebody said that they noticed that they pee less on warmer days, even though they're chugging water. It's almost as if their sweat creates this, you know, equal water in, water out, and so they don't end up having to pee. So I do think it's important on a long distance trail to remind yourself that you need to drink water and that it's important to stay hydrated, especially if you notice that you're not going to the bathroom as much as you should be for the amount of water that you're drinking. And finally, one hiker shared that he notices that when his hiker hunger hits, that he has to start digging a larger hole because, you know, more food in, more food out. Another realization that a lot of hikers have is that they get into a muscle memory they don't even realize they have. So once they're off trail, they find themselves reaching for their water bottle when they're thirsty. You know, it's like, I'm thirsty, I'm just gonna reach back there for my smart water, or reach for my little hydration tube. I never found myself reaching for my water bottle like other folks did, but I did get used to the idea of I have my pack with me, so I have everything that I might need. And when I was off trail, I mean, it took several weeks before I realized I don't actually have everything I need with me at any given time. So I had to make a mental note of, okay, grab my wallet, grab my keys, debit cards, etc. Because again, I just got so used to, I always have what I need right on me. So this kind of brings us to the more mental side of things, because once you've gone on a trail and you had one bag for 6 months that had everything you needed in it, with the exception of resupplying food or certain other supplies, you get home and you see all of this stuff in your house, and people start to realize that maybe less is more. And having all of these things might not actually bring them happiness, but it might be more burdensome to have all of this stuff. So I think a lot of thru hikers go home and they just start purging, decluttering, and they find themselves becoming more and more minimalistic. But this idea starts rolling over into other areas of life. So maybe thru hikers aren't just getting rid of clutter and stuff they don't need, but They might also start getting rid of old habits or insecurities. For myself, I mentioned before that I used to feel like I had to have on makeup if I went out in public every single day. But I would also wash my hair every day and blow dry it and straighten it, etc., and spend so much time just to get prepared to go somewhere. But now that time I spend in different ways because I've reprioritized, and I feel like there's a much more constructive use of my time, even if that's just getting another hour of sleep. One mental hurdle that thru hikers often have is the way water is treated differently on trail versus in town. On trail, if you've been in an area especially where there is a lack of water or a lack of good water sources, so maybe you've been drinking out of a cattle trough or a cow pond, or maybe even from a cistern that has a dead animal in it. And then you go to town and you have this already treated water right there at your fingertips by just turning a knob. So it's something that definitely allows you to appreciate having fresh water basically instantly whenever you want it. And then also, it's really interesting because on trail you're told to avoid water sources when you're digging a cat hole and go into the bathroom. But then you go to town and you sit over a perfectly clean bowl of water and doo-doo into it. So anyway, that can be an interesting flip of events for the mind. Another mental adjustment that hikers often have to make is the recalibration of speed, and this can be troublesome in two different ways. First of all, you get used to having a certain pace as a thru hiker. I feel like most of us probably walk about 2 to 3 miles per hour. Well, I found that my friends and family usually don't walk 2 to 3 miles per hour, and if we're walking somewhere together, I actually have to tell myself, slow down a little bit, or they tell me, because I just tend to fly ahead of them and they're like, golly, slow down. So it's actually an effort that I have to put into it to walk a little bit slower. But then on the other hand of things, if you're in a car or on a motorcycle or anything that goes faster than a walking pace, it can be a bit overwhelming, and it can feel like you're going 70 miles per hour down the road when really the person driving is only going 35 miles per hour. And if you haven't driven in several months, then once you get behind the wheel, that's kind of a shocker too. And some other random realizations are things like how a soft, cushiony wool sock can turn into something like a solid plastic shell-like thing. I mean, it's really disgusting how gross a thru hiker sock can turn pretty quickly, and they will never ever be the same. Folks also find it very normal on trail, especially if they haven't seen people in a while, to talk to themselves and sing to themselves out loud. And for myself, Christmas music and Disney songs always seem to be the first to come into my mind and out of my mouth. And finally, how being so exhausted can cloud your judgment on what is an acceptable place to take a nap or camp for the night, like maybe a park bench or a Walmart or even under a bridge. And I've slept under a bridge with a dead bird. All right, y'all, that's all I have for you today. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who contributed their experiences so I could compile this list. If you've experienced any of these things mentioned today or something that I didn't include today, feel free to leave that in the comments below, because I always think it's cool to see how we humans can also kind of be feral once we're out in the woods for a while. And I'm sure that not everybody realizes the same differences in themselves. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we will see y'all next time.